the weekend?
I don't know why it's not always.
We-
Yeah, it's just like Microsoft. It's gonna get.
Sorry. Okay, we're
Sorry.
live.
Jalen.
Okay, we're live. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very special meeting of Mahone Bay Town Council on a Friday morning as we await the stormy weather that's coming tomorrow. Tie it down, nail it down, but it's going to be a windy, wet day. And we'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered this morning in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and in a spirit of coexistence. We will call the meeting to order. Well, members of council, you have an agenda that was emailed to you. Entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented or to amend it. Councillor Carver moves, Councillor Now seconds. On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. There is one long-awaited and long-anticipated item on the agenda this morning, and it's the financial statements of 2022-23. We wait with bated breath for 23-24, which are coming shortly. However, CAO, did you want to make a comment before we get started on the statement?
Just as it's customary, I'll do so, just to indicate that we had an audit and finance committee meeting prior to this, where we had an overview of the work the auditors had done on the 22-23 statements, and then their expectation for the 23-24, as we are playing catch up. Those statements will come later in the fall. So as to the specifics that are in front of you today, I guess Manager of Finance Ashley Wenzel may want to comment further, if that's all right with you, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Looking
So
forward to it. I didn't sleep last night, wondering what she was gonna say.
that's how I envision everyone is before a finance meeting. So I wanted to go over just sort of the process that we went through in the last year and how we've arrived to this financial statement. So prior to this, Deloitte was our auditor, and we've now switched to BDO. Because of that, BDO had to do an analysis on the 21-22 numbers before doing the audit for the 22-23 numbers. So reason being is because the statements in front of us are BDO statements, but they do have a predecessor's numbers in there. So BDO has to go through and make sure that they're comfortable with the prior year's audit and the numbers and do their due diligence based on their materiality. So, which is a good thing. We don't want just an auditor to blindly accept anything. We want them to always question everything. So the audit this year took longer because they had to also go through the prior year numbers. That won't happen next year because the prior year numbers will be BDO's numbers. So there will be no issue with that. Another reason that the audit took a little longer is because this is the first year with new auditors, and with anybody new, they're learning about the town, they're learning, we're working with a team, we're learning each other, learning how we do things, how they do things, and it always takes longer the first year because it's just everything is brand new. The other thing that I noticed is that BDO asked a lot of questions that I thought were very appropriate, whether it was material or not. They were doing a lot more long-term planning of the financials in the future. So even though something may have been immaterial, but they noticed it was, let's say, classified incorrectly, they wanted to take time to figure it out with me now so that it didn't grow to become a material issue in the future. And I really appreciate that as a past auditor because they're planning for success in the future by taking more time now. And honestly, if you're gonna do an audit, do it right. If you have to ask those questions, by all means. So it did take longer. They had to have comfort over Deloitte's numbers. They needed to figure out their controls. They needed to test our controls. They needed to get into the groove. And at the end of the day, until they were comfortable, the audited statements were not going to be provided. So I can assure everyone here and at home that any questions the auditors had for us, we were diligent in getting back to them ASAP. We did everything we could to control at least our side of the audit process and to be basically 100% available at any time to the auditors. And I know they did their best to get through the audit as quick as possible, but also maintaining their professional skepticism and being able to test what they need to, ask the questions they need to. So I think the audit time was appropriate for the year that we're in the sense that they're new, they're testing a prior firm's audit. So I can say as someone who used to be an auditor that I feel everything was done as it should have been. And I'm happy, the statements came out a little later than we'd all like, but I do think that the due diligence was there. And at the end of the day, again, if we're gonna do an audit, let's do it right so that we can set ourselves up for success in the future. That's the first thing I wanted to note. The second thing I wanted to note was that the statements look similar to the Deloitte statements. And the reason for that is because the comparative numbers of last year are still Deloitte's numbers. So our plan over the next couple of years is to have the statements form a little closer to the FIR, the financial information return, which is the information return that we provide to the province, which is essentially our financials in the format the province requests. They have a very strict way of showing things, and we have to take our statements and mold them into what the province is asking. That helps us get our debentures, that helps us get our financing, so it's a very important step. One way that we want to work with the province more is to have these statements more easily read for both everyone in the public, but also for the province. So over the next couple of years, you'll see a transition that the format will change to be a little more along the lines of FIR. And that's a good thing. We want that. The province wants that. We want that. I think they'll be easier to read for the public. So that's good. And I did want to mention that if anyone has any questions ever about financing, the procedures, the audits, the budget, anything, whether it's council or the public, by all means, send me an email. Let's set up an appointment and let's chat. I have no problem talking to anybody, so please come on in and visit me. Nobody visits accountants, so come in and visit me. And if there's any specific questions, we'll hash it out there. So that's sort of my little caveat before presenting the statements. So if you want it, let's do the utilities first. So basically, council needs to approve these three statements. The rest of the statements will be provided subsequently, but we don't need approval on them. They're not audited statements. They're just compilations, which is essentially taking the information that we provided and putting them into the BDO financial statement format. They aren't something that we report to the province. They aren't something that an opinion is provided with. So they're just basically taking our numbers and making them pretty and making them more standard with the rest. So these are the statements that are important. They're all important, but these are the statements that have an opinion on them. These are the statements that we need council's approval. The committee, like Mr. Hyde has already mentioned, that committee has met and they went through with the auditors sort of the progress of the audit, and they advised that it would now come to council for approval. So here we are. So these are kind of all new for everybody to get them. So I don't know if there's any questions or we wanted to go through them. How would we like to proceed?
Any preferences?
Start with the electrical.
Yeah.
Start with, okay, just before you start that, can I ask what's probably a very obvious question?
You absolutely.
How do you define materiality? Is it an opinion or is it a calculation?
It's a dollar value. So essentially it's based on, typically firms have it based on a percentage of the overall. So if your balance sheet is, $5,000 and their materiality is around 10%, then everything below that would be insignificant. Anything above that would be material, where they would start asking questions about it. So materiality is based on the volume and the dollar value of each entity that they use. The reason for materiality is so important is because it drives whether the auditors need to test more, whether they need to check more things on the statements. So materiality is huge to drive an audit. But that's basically how they do it. So each statement would actually have a different level of materiality. So the consolidate would have the highest level because that has the consolidated numbers. Yeah, so everything else would be a little smaller, but that's how they do it. They don't necessarily share their materiality with us, but there's general practice out there, and then and professional judgment's also in there as well to extent, but materiality is, sort of their hard and fast rule.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's their definition.
Well, there's guidance in the handbook on what the materiality should be, but then each firm would have their own, what they're comfortable with. So they typically wouldn't have a materiality level that's higher than what is standard practice for the industry. But they may, if they feel you take on a client that's more risky, you may actually bring down the materiality. So you have to actually test more things. So if materiality calculations is 10,000, but you're like, we don't know this. We don't know this client, we feel there might be some things going on, you may bring it down to 5 and test everything 5 and above. So that's where the professional judgment comes in.
When we publish these documents, and I assume we're gonna put them online when we're finished
Correct.
dealing with them. Do we have any kind of a statement for the public about our level of materiality on the individual statements?
So we haven't done that in the past, but I could certainly discuss that with BDO and see if they'd be comfortable sharing that. Again, they don't really disclose it to me as, it's sort of their internal tests that they do, but I mean, it's not a huge secret, I can envision, I feel like that's probably something.
We know the
We can figure
materiality
the number out, yeah,
But
so.
a citizen who's looking at them may wonder, well, what about that $3,000?
Yes,
But
it's
if
more,
that doesn't exceed our materiality level,
so materiality here at the town level is more like $250,000. Oh,
That's
right,
consolidated.
at the consolidated level.
is that a reasonable explanation for someone asking a question about our financial status? If it doesn't exceed our level of materiality, is that enough of an answer? We're not saying we don't bother with it.
Are we saying for the town or for the auditors when they're auditing our work?
When they're auditing our work, or in our statements.
Yeah, so I mean, if the material is 250 and there's something that, they're questioning and they just don't get a good vibe at 220, they'll probably still look into it. That's where the professional judgment comes in of the firm.
Exactly, sure.
So it's hard to say because it depends on, if there's high risk, there's more high risk areas like cash and stuff. So if cash was off, even if cash is off $15,000, that's probably something that they're gonna look at, 'cause cash is a high risk
Easy,
area.
yeah, fluid, easy.
The issue, Mayor, is around the qualification of the financial statements and whether there's anything that the auditor feels cannot be validated that exceeds the level of
Okay.
materiality. And if you exceed that level of materiality, it might trigger a qualification of the financial statements.
Yeah.
In this case, we do have a qualification of the financial statements, but it's not driven by materiality. It's driven by a new compliance regime around asset retirement values. So if the question comes about why is there a qualified statement, of which this is a qualified statement, the driver of that is not materiality. The driver is this new reporting feature and compliance feature that the town needs to catch up on, as well as many municipalities and many companies and many corporations all across the province.
Who introduced that change, Councillor Feeney?
So this is like an international standard
Oh,
that is
okay.
rolling out across the globe around compliance around the asset retirement obligations, and it's driving all ourselves and all of our partners and our fellow municipalities to do studies,
Yeah.
of which, so this is a policy that, and this is all noted on page 1 or page 2 of the document from the auditors. And this is driven entirely by, post-retirement benefits. So, for example, like the end of life of the solar garden, or the end of life of the wind farm, or the end of life of the municipal waste services dump. And making sure that those types of things are studied. And you can see that in the document. So we're a year or so behind.
Yeah, we're
And,
here so on liabilities for how
right.
much it's gonna cost to handle this. And asbestos is also a big issue
Right.
there. with
Transformers and,
Yeah, so I'm working with Jonathan now to bring someone in to do the assessments. I think it's all buildings, or all structures older than 97. Because that's when asbestos is one of the big ones, but that's when it was most prevalent. So they'll come in, they'll assess it, and then we'll either deal with it or we'll put a liability of how much it would cost to mitigate it on the financials. So, but that's why the
It's just a-
qualification is there. It's just, and that is so common for any new standard pushed out to the public or pushed out to anyone. It takes companies, municipalities, anyone a couple years to get up to speed. So you'll notice that there'll be a lot of municipalities that are in the same boat, that they're working on getting a consultant in and to so that they don't have the qualification, but this is pretty common for a new
And
standard.
I mean, it's all based on the concept that we track and report on the balance of our various capital assets. So, you know, if you're gonna say that the capital asset has no residual value at the end of its life, but not record that it actually costs money to dispose of it at the end of its life,
Yeah,
you're not accurately reflecting the value of that asset.
that's right.
So we've got brand new assets like the solar garden have a lot of value. But at the end of its life, if we have to dispose of those solar panels, there's a cost there. So the current value really should be, this is the new principle, reflective of the full life cycle of the asset. And it's a good principle.
It's
But it could take
absolutely,
some time to work its way through.
I think the salient point is this is well understood, well known, and we've known about it for some time, so this isn't a surprise. I mean, I think we've both known, so the Joint Services Board, for example, would have just made this transition, and therefore we're able to meet the guidelines and have unqualified statements. Fair enough. So certain firms emphasize this. Our previous auditor kind of didn't do it. It's industry driven predominantly.
yeah,
So we'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. Probably won't get there for obviously 23-24 statements will have the same qualification. And then the 24-25 hopefully will be good to go.
And we've got a totally reasonable explanation for why.
yeah.
In most operations in the country.
This is a very common,
Yeah, whatever
yeah,
similar
this type that you have to rely on sort of a consultant and that type of thing, we have to, I mean, I can't assess it, so we need to bring someone in, it just takes time, especially nowadays after COVID, it takes time to get any third party in, so that you're gonna see this a lot with a lot of financial statements at this point, so I'm comfortable with this qualified opinion.
The rationale.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Really? No?
So I think if we go to 7 on the electric utility, the statement of operations for their operating fund, that's probably the best place to start. You'll notice that we have, so when we budget, you'll notice that the 2023 is showing a surplus of 528,000 and we budgeted 82,000. Why there's such a difference? Well, when we budget conservatively. That's the best way to do it always. I'd rather over assume expenses, assume the worst case, and then get surprised that we have more, we're more profitable at the end, or we have more surplus, sorry. So I'm happy to see this, but that is the explanation, that we're off from budget, of course, but we're off in a good way, and this is the direction I'd always want to see us be off from budget. And that just shows that we are conservative. We do make sure that we acknowledge something could cost us as much as it possibly could, and that we don't over assume any revenue from power. So I'm comfortable with the difference there. And you can see from 2022 to 2023, we've gone up about 200,000. So we're heading in the right direction. This is good.
Maybe I could just, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, supplement as.
Caveat for this too
Of
is,
course.
it's important that we do try to be this conservative with the projection on electrical, in part because costs are not always current. So we know that we have some costs for this fiscal year, the 22-23 year, including a fuel adjustment mechanism on purchases from Nova Scotia Power that have yet to kick in. So if we manage to get a little bit more of a surplus in that current year, and that goes into the bank, that will offset any rate shocks down the road as a result of NSPI catching up for retroactive billings in that period. And I think there's recently been some news in the media about that fuel adjustment mechanism. So yeah, this is good news, but also doesn't really represent a windfall. It just represents a little bit better long-term planning about how to approach those deferred costs.
Absolutely.
And if NSPI had been charging the full rates that they might have been charging, then this surplus would be a deficit.
Well, or at least it wouldn't be a
Yeah,
circle.
well, yeah,
It would not look so good.
Yeah,
The other thing within this statement is that we did have, we do have a qualified opinion, as Councillor Feeny mentioned, the ARO, and also, for the inventory. That's no surprise. We did have a count, but because BDO was not present for the account, Deloitte was, they didn't feel they were able to rely on those numbers. So we did do everything correct in regards to having our auditors at the time do the count on March 31st. It was just that BDO's process and standards are that they can't, if they weren't there, they cannot rely on those numbers. So that's kind of out of our hands in that sense. But this does show a shift though, that we are now getting the auditors involved on accounts, and going forward, we will be getting rid of these opinions and we will be heading in the right direction, so.
Councillor Feeny?
Just to provide some context on so historically, we had less integration with our friends in Riverport. And our improved and more intense partnership has led to inventory consolidation as well. So we would have ran into this issue 2 years ago where we had consolidated inventory, and it raised to that level of materiality, which was a little over, I think it was like around $115,000. So at the time, there was a very real issue around how we would determine what inventory was ours, what inventory was Riverport's, and there was a process and account put in place to resolve that issue. And my understanding is that the account went forth with Deloitte.
Yeah.
The issue has been resolved. We have a much more stronger and more robust inventory controls in place now. But it's the transition between BDO and Deloitte has triggered again another a qualified opinion on the inventory item, which is no surprise. And I guess we knew that this issue existed. We put a plan in place to resolve the issue. I think the issue has generally been resolved, and the next year when when they do the count, it's good to go. And then in the future, we won't need to do the inventory count, which historically hasn't been a priority for us because we've never had as much inventory as we have now.
Combined.
Exactly. So this is a newer issue created through our partnerships. It wasn't a historical issue because the amount of inventory we had laying around was a modest amount. Now that it's together and consolidated with Riverport, it's risen to a level of materiality where we need to do a count periodically. But I wouldn't even think we're going to do a count annually. I don't know, maybe we will, but I wouldn't imagine.
The inventory right now is also higher because of our ELC, but also because of the transformers that we've had to, so that's significantly increased it, but
yeah.
I almost would prefer to have a countdown every year, just because what happened with Deloitte before I came here is that they didn't think the inventory was material, and then they were like, oops, it was, and we didn't do a count, and the time had already passed, and then the opinion was provided. So for me, I would just rather almost have them there. It'll take them 2 hours every year to do it, just do the count, cover our bases, and then, which is also a good control too, right? Because then it makes sure that we have someone that's testing our controls on the inventory. That's not, I was there for the count, but I would be considered biased. So it's good to have someone in just to kind of watch us count and make sure that we're dotting our i's and crossing our t's. So I probably would still bring them in, but that's just for my own sanity.
How many items are in our inventory?
Ooh, well, it
Control.
depends if you're talking screws or you're talking
Well,
molds or.
the items that are for resale as opposed to consumption, as part and parcel of, like telephone poles and transformers and.
At the time of our last,
Cabling.
at the time of March 31st, 2024, we had 6 poles on hand for our last count. So we don't keep a lot. Like I said, transformers right now, we have a significant amount because we're going through the overhaul.
Transition,
Yeah. But we don't keep a lot, but most of the inventory we use, most of the inventory is for us, for our utilities to use. So it's not really for sale. It's more to fix and provide the best service we can for.
But if Riverport takes it, arguably, we're selling that item to Riverport.
So right now, Riverport has been purchasing some of their own inventory and then they've been using some of ours, of which then we're tracking and billing them for, yes.
Yeah, and essentially what we've been doing with Riverport so far is they're drawing down their existing inventory.
Yeah.
And then, quote unquote, purchasing new inventory through us.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that, the inventory costs have inflated, like the values of everything in our economy have inflated. But also, we keep spare parts, so Ashley's point about, we may have some stuff that's used when a customer gets a new service and we put in a few poles for the service. We may have some stuff that gets sold to RLC when they need it, but also, we have to keep redundant things on hand because the supply chains are challenging these days. So if we have voltage regulators on our system, which we do as of last year, and we didn't before, we want to have a spare one. So, that line of thinking has led to keeping a fair bit of inventory just so that we're not dependent on the just-in-time inventory supply that really broke down a fair bit. over the
Just
last
no longer
number of
just in
issues.
time inventory supply.
So that's also driven us to carry a larger volume of replacement inventory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, traditionally, meaning, 2019, 2020, we might have had an inventory level in the $65,000 range. Historically, we didn't even rise to our level of materiality as the accounting terminology of materiality. To Dylan's point with supply chain shortages and longer lead times in COVID, we pre-ordered a lot of equipment to run the business, and that's why our inventory now is up closer to $300,000. So some of this is.
Some of this is the water and waste are, experiencing some of those same pressures. Their inventory is more valuable. They need to keep more redundancies due to supply chain issues. We're buoyed a little bit by working closely with the town of Lunenburg. It's actually coincidental that we just had an issue where between us, we used their last spare part. Now we're both waiting on a back order. Thanks to Lunenburg, they let us use the last spare part we had between us for this particular component. So, that just shows how challenging it is to, get by with a limited inventory.
Okay, any other questions or?
So, yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I was just gonna say, that was the main point I wanted to show on the electric utility. There's notes to go through. I'm not sure what our preference is to go through those notes or allow everyone to read them independently. Again, after this meeting, I'm more than welcome any and all questions, from council and or public.
Mayor had moved that council accept the town of Mahone Bay electrical utility financial statements for the year ending March 31st, 2023.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Carver. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried.
Wonderful, thank you. So,
Do we record, we're not, are we broadcasting out? No.
Yep.
Or?
yeah,
Okay. If the electrical utility is owed money, how does that get recorded in here?
by who?
By customers.
By customers or by RELC or by?
RELC.
So that would be, so they would be considered, yeah, so that would be, they would just be set up as a receivable, just like a customer would.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the water utility.
Excellent, so within the auditor's report, it's the same qualified opinions as the electric, so we have our asset retirement obligation. Which Councilor Feeney's done a great job explaining that, and then we have the same thing with the inventory count. Again, we did have Deloitte here to do an inventory count on the water. It's still relatively immaterial, but because I'm anal, I kind of want it done every year now. So, but unfortunately, because we switched auditors, they couldn't rely on the count. So that is why we have that, but we shouldn't see that going forward. And then I think the best, I like the operating fund because it compares it against budget, which is sort of where all the mindsets are for the whole year is comparing against budget. So if we wanted to go to page 6 and page 7, we have the operating fund and the capital fund. So page 6 is the operating fund, so that's no different than the operating budget, same context. And we show a surplus for this year of 195,000. Last year we were at 146 and we had a budget of 147, so I think we did a pretty good job there.
That's cumulative surplus.
Yeah.
Did you say
Not-
195 or
not in here.
159?
Yeah,
It's 150.
It's 159, you said.
But also we should be clear, as Bill said.
Yes,
like,
yes.
What we actually ran was a surplus of $13,000 compared to a budgeted surplus of about $1,000.
yeah.
And we're lucky to have $12,000 more than we thought, but it doesn't go all that far.
Yeah.
Just in terms of like the difference over.
Yeah,
prior
no, that's
years.
fair,
Yeah.
that's fair. I'm looking at
I
it
mean,
cumulative, so,
I-
yeah.
I guess $159,000 in 102 years is.
I'm thinking positive.
Taking a while,
Well, definitely good to
was-
see it's not a deficit.
Yeah, I mean, the prior year it was 80,000.
No, it's a deficit
12,
5 years ago. It was a negative number.
So we're getting there. The cumulative is still important too, because it's giving the historical trend as well, so. But yes, I should have probably went there and then the cumulative, so thank you for that.
But that-
Councillor Shaney raises an interesting point. If you think about the citizens, and we're seeing every day now, we're seeing comments about the increasing cost of government in Mahone Bay as we get into the election mode. It would be useful to have some way of addressing to citizens. I know it looks like the cost of water has gone up, but if you go back 5 years or 6 years or 7 years, we were in the hole.
Mhm.
And we're not supposed to be in the hole. So what we've done is to correct the fact that we ran on a deficit up until 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But we're not now. It helps, I think it helps them to understand why the rates are going like they are. CAO?
I do agree with you, but on the other hand, we're about to dip down into that same situation again. Because we have been 3 years without a rate increase. And, you know, we are, as all utilities are, experiencing those same pressures again. So we do expect the 23-24 statements to show a deficit.
Yeah.
If not at least the current fiscal year, we do expect to run a deficit in water due to not adjusting the rates up along with the inflation of costs.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that we're working on a rate study, but we also need financials to be part of that rate study, so
Yeah.
it kind of goes hand in hand, so it's not that we're ignoring the issue and just
We
seeing.
had planned a 1 year lag on the
Yeah.
incoming new rates, but it's ended up as 3 or even 4 years
Yeah,
lag.
but we have-
because of the-
We are working on it, but yeah, we've worked hard on it actually.
The point is that you can't look at 1 year.
Yeah, absolutely,
You
have
have
to
to
look
look
at
at a
trend.
series of years.
You have to look at the numbers, but you have to look at what's going on. So for example, you know, prices are just like, Mr. Hyde said, like prices have just gone crazy since COVID. So everything is just costing us more. So, you know, if we haven't had a rate increase in several years, but we've had a huge exponential increase in expenses, we're going to run a deficit because we can't afford what we have to pay. So, you know, it also has to be expected that in order to run something, we have to pay for the items to run that utility, and that comes with an increase in rate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a trend is a great way to look at it.
It's just like our households, actually.
And just look at your grocery bills for the last, right? I mean, it's
I stopped eating, so I.
it's probably a good idea if you want to save money.
You know, I think what the numbers illustrate on water and that will be compounded by last year's numbers. And we know this from looking at our budget. Like our revenue from water is barely covering our operating costs. And we have a transfer between fire and fire protection services revenue and comes over in the form of the hydrants. But even with that benefit of the $180,000 that transfers over from the hydrants, we're not covering a fraction of the capital costs on running the utility. So if you think about the utility is supposed to not only cover its operating costs, but also from its revenue sources, pay for all its capital investments. And we're like, and And every other utility in Nova Scotia has a water utility. You saw that in the paper last week with the story on CBC about the regulator increasing the water rates to 5 other municipalities. So this is a larger trend than we see in Mahone Bay, but the reality is we're a small town with not a lot of scale. So it's a bigger challenge for us unless we get growth. And we have big investments coming down for water and stormwater.
And I mean, to put a couple of quick numbers to that, not to belabor the point, but Joe is absolutely correct. If you look at the town in 1949, we're at $150,000 in the dollars of the day to put the lines that currently run down Main Street to supply water in, those original ductile iron lines. Those lines haven't been replaced since 1949. 2 years ago, we began that process starting at the treatment facility. It's intended to continue through town over the following 10 years. That today, that $150,000 of infrastructure from 1949 will cost more than $20 million to replace.
Right.
So, how can our tiny utility shoulder even what is likely to be up to a third or half of those costs with external funding? It's a tremendous struggle for such a small utility.
And we don't use tax dollars.
That's the principle here, is that
Yeah,
it should be covered out of utility rates, but what Councilor
We
Finney
do.
is mentioning is it would lead to an untenable level of rates if we actually did try to cover all the capital out of entirely utility rate funds. So that's where things like the infrastructure charge, are used, the DD transfer tax, are
Hydrant
used to
charges.
help contribute to those capital costs, but traditionally hasn't been covered off tax rate.
If you needed to recover all the costs of the water utility from water rates,
Okay,
we're much higher rates.
all right. Councillor Kirby, you had an early departure time?
I do, but I'll have to leave within 4 minutes.
You wanna make a motion
It's
on
not gonna
water
change
usage
quorum,
before you
though.
go?
Actually, go quick, you got 4 minutes.
But it won't change quorum, so don't rush on my account.
Well, are there any other questions with the water? I think it's.
No, good to go. You want the honor of moving that one?
Oh, I would like to move approval of the water utility statements.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Lawrence Croft, moved by Councillor Carver. On the question, all in favor? The motion is
Oh, I
carried.
voted. Before I go, I just want to say thank you very much to Ashley for such an excellent summary. It was really helpful, succinct, clear, excellent. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Carver will be on the road. Have a good one.
See ya.
Thank you. See you.
Okay, we're gonna go to the consolidated.
Yeah, so the consolidated, it's
Don't like
conceptual,
that perplexed look on
Well,
your face when you say that.
consolidated statements conceptually are a little harder to explain because there's a lot of back and forth between intercompany transactions that are removed, and it's just a lot harder to kind of pinpoint a specific item because it's the consolidation of all the financials, it's consolidation of the numbers together. So I did want to point out that the same thing, we have an ARO qualified opinion as well as the tangible assets, and that's carried forward from the 2 utilities. So I'm probably not gonna go through them just because I think it's just a little more difficult to explain them in the time we have. But I would suggest, should anybody want to sit down with me and go through a consolidated statement, I will put you to sleep very quickly, but I'm very happy to do it. It
You
is.
know that's an easy task to put in the sleep.
Well, you could be my first then. But yeah, so the one thing I did want to mention is that if these are posted on our website, there will be a couple changes still. There's about $11,000 that needs to be amended. It is immaterial. It shouldn't affect the council's opinion to pass a motion to approve these, but there will be, if anyone's doing sort of a comparison of the numbers. There's, excuse me, there's a couple of rounding issues that BDO is still working out. That's kind of the very last step, so they need to amend these statements for the 11,000 and then work on the rounding so that, every dollar is rounded out properly. And then there may be some verbiage that has changed, but the qualified opinions are still there. There shouldn't be anything that would warrant council to render a different opinion on approving them. If something does happen, I would certainly advise council and let them know if it was of a material nature. But as now, these are basically sound and whole on a materiality basis.
Ashley, so the standalone town general as a as a statement that's not required.
Yeah.
But is a nice to have.
Yeah.
Is that something that is being prepared for this
Yeah,
fiscal
so-
year as well?
Yeah, we should receive every statement that we've received in the past. I just put these as the high priority, and then the rest should be, the compilations should arrive next week. I don't wanna, but I also have put, BDO is preparing our FIR for this year, so I've also asked them to make that top priority, so that may bump the compilations by a week or so. But my main objective is to get that FIR and these financials into the province so that they can start reviewing it, and then we can file our next year, so. Try to balance all of the things we need, but yes, we will have every statement that we've received in the past, we'll have all of the funds.
Like my sense of things and looking at looking at these numbers, comparing them to our budget documents, is we ran another surplus both within the within town general, which is, I guess, isn't a surprise given our jump off point for the next fiscal year, that we kind of knew that, so it's nice to see that validated. And then I guess we'll have a fund balance statement as well around the various trusts like perpetual care and.
Yeah, I think,
And
I'm just looking here, do we have something in,
I don't think yet.
not yet, yeah, it's probably in the town list.
Yeah, in town.
But yes, you'll have all of that stuff, but I've already gone through it with the auditors, so it's in progress. Just a matter of prioritizing which statements to kind of get first. But I'll send all those out once, I mean, they don't need approval because they're not an audited provided with an opinion. But I will certainly send them out, and I don't think we normally post them, but again, if.
And so the cadence with the, obviously the province is well apprised of our change of auditors, and they understand the sequencing and the sequencing of the statements and when they're coming, and obviously are very encouraging of our change of auditors at the time. So we expect that these statements will be into the province in the next, 10 days.
So yes, as soon as these statements, the draft is off, I'm gonna send them in, although the province did say that they had no problem reviewing them in a draft form. But we need the FIR done so that they can take these statements and review them against the FIR. And then as soon as we file the 2022, they can send us the 2023 template, of which then BDO is ready to pull the trigger because these statements are done, we will send them off. And then once the audit's done for 23, 24, then we can file those, so. And I've been in constant contact with the province, and they're very aware these statements are coming, the FIR is in the shadows, but not too far off, and they're.
Shadows of the belly.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're eager to get them. We're eager to give them to the province, and BDO is me stop bothering them about it. So everyone's on board to get this done.
So full steam ahead as far as our borrowing resolutions and our ability to access the borrowing window at Municipal Finance Corp in the fall.
Yeah, we only have one project for which we have an active temporary borrowing resolution, which is the solar garden.
Solar garden, right?
So that's the only one that we could include in the full debenture, but that's the significant one that's currently got carrying costs associated with it.
Okay.
So all that we'll need for that is confirmation that Municipal Affairs is gonna tell MFC that we're in good standing, which is what Ashley's working on.
Yeah.
And then we'll get an actual borrowing resolution passed by council, probably at the next meeting on the 26th, next week. But that's something Ashley's gotta get from MFC as the time approaches. We'll have that, some final calculations, of course, as to what goes into the accumulated capital cost on the solar garden.
Right.
We wanna make sure that's kind of up to the minute.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
On a related point, is there a finance managers association in Nova Scotia? Municipal Finance Managers Association. Do you talk to your counterparts in other municipalities?
Absolutely.
Compare notes, issues, problems?
We sure
And
do.
would you anticipate, I'm thinking of the FIR and moving it around to a provincial defined structural presentation. But is there an opportunity to lobby NSFM to lobby the province to deal with an issue that provincial finance managers organization has identified?
Well, I think overall, the province is gonna notice the trend over the next couple of years that the FIRs are going to constantly be filed late.
Late.
And the reason being is that audit firms, and you know, it's so different from when Councillor Feeney and I were auditors back in the day. You know, there's less staff, they're really struggling to get the audits done in regards to having the manpower to do it. It's not you burn, you know, you work there till 4 AM and get it done, and it's different now, and we're noticing a huge shift in that, and it's a lot harder to retain people and to even obtain them, I guess. So I think, we have heard from many people that in many municipalities that they're struggling to make the deadline as well, because the audits are taking longer to do because they just don't have capacity to do all the audits, all the firms. So I think, you know, lobbying is a great idea. I think that they're gonna notice either way, they're gonna notice a trend that, you know, if every municipality is not meeting a deadline anymore, they gotta stop and say, what's going on? Is this
Yeah.
a practical deadline anymore? And the deadline is not practical. The deadline does not speak to the audit capacity of these firms nowadays, and it does need to change. And I think that that is something that will happen whether it's lobbied or not, just out of practicality. And yeah,
Yep.
a great question.
Mayor, I think that's a fair point. I mean, the challenge with our town is we're a small town, but we have our partnerships drive a complexity in our financial reporting
Yes.
because of our subsidiaries, which essentially dwarf the size of the town's balance sheet. So we have a 10% ownership in a $44 million wind farm. We have a small percentage of a very, very large waste management business. And we have a partnership, and we own a solar garden, and we have regulated utilities that all need their own individual filings. Not every municipality is in that boat. And so we are to some degree beholden to waiting for the timing of the financial statements that are provided from us from our subsidiaries. And they can be slow. We have to wait patiently for those to show up, because the same group of auditors, of which are all approved by the province, and it's a small select group, are under industry stress. Some through COVID, some through changing of the work environment. If you go to the annual CPA graduation evening, I remember not that many years ago being in a large ballroom with many, many people and tables of dignitaries. And, you know, of course, now that event is dramatically smaller. So the years of indentured servitude that maybe Ashley was used to as a younger person, like younger people aren't necessarily are entering that field, and all of the firms are under labor pressure.
Doesn't bode well for the future.
Well, or the people that are in it are incredibly well compensated. So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what Ashley's hoping for.
Yeah.
But I mean,
But then they retire earlier. Right?
well, we had the finance committee meeting with the Joint Services Board a week ago today. We had a very similar conversation with Brent Thornton, who's the auditor for Joint Services Board. We've had a very similar conversation with the auditor for PVSC, and a very similar conversation with the area auditor. I mean, so this is a recurring theme. But the good news is, it seems actually we've got a strong working relationship with BDO and our new partner in charge, whose name is Galen Sabian, I believe. So good Lunenbury County name.
Yes.
So
they've worked very hard, and they've asked questions that have impressed me, and I'm not impressed easily, so, I'm happy and look forward to working with them for many more years on this and to get to a point where we've got it down to, it's just the eye, we'll get that done, no problem, so that's what I wanna say in a couple years, so.
Mayor, I'd move that we accept the consolidated financial statements of the town of Home Bay for the year ending March 31st, 2023.
Seconded by Councillor Now. Thank you, Councillor Feeney. You've heard the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. And these will be online. Will we wait for the?
I'm going to double check with BDO to ensure that they're okay with these being posted, because they're still in draft
Okay.
form. Or if there's another one that they would prefer, and then if they give the okay, just where they are still in draft, then we'll put them up.
So for the citizens who may be interested, they may soon be online. We're planning to do that with SAP.
Yeah.
And if they have any questions, you've already indicated.
Yeah,
they contact
on
you.
anything, if it has to do with numbers, just let me know, just send me an email, come on in, I've got a big office and I'd like to fill it with people. to
There
talk
you
to,
go.
so,
Okay.
absolutely.
Well, just the fact that you've got an office makes me jealous.
That's because I took you
All right, so now we can-
Fair enough.
Any other comments? CAO, did you have any comments?
Nope.
No? Well, I think that wraps up our agenda for the morning. So we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you for coming in this morning. It was a worthwhile effort.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks.
We got there.
Thank you,
Have a
Mr.
lovely
Wilson.
weekend.